you have started before. Not once, many times. A plan to get healthier, a plan to finally save something every month, a plan to launch the thing you keep talking about at dinner but never quite begin. Every one of those plans started with real conviction, real energy, and a genuine belief that this time would be different. And almost every one of them was quietly gone within about 4 weeks. Not in some dramatic collapse, not with a decision you consciously made. Just a slow fade. You stopped mentioning it. You slid back into the old routine without really noticing the exact day it happened, and somewhere along the way you told yourself you'd pick it back up. Once things calmed down, once the timing lined up better, once you finally had more discipline. Here is what I want you to actually absorb tonight. Your plan did not die because you lacked discipline, and it did not die because the idea itself was weak. Almost every plan that dies inside its first month dies for reasons that have almost nothing to do with your character and almost everything to do with how the plan was constructed in the first place. You were, in a very real sense, set up before you even began, not by bad luck and not by a lack of willpower, but by a blueprint that was never structurally capable of surviving an ordinary month. Before we get into why, I want you to understand what a dead plan actually cost you, because it is far more than the wasted weeks. When a plan quietly dies, most people only add up the obvious losses, the gym membership that went unused, the app subscription still charging your card, the notebook that never made it past page 3. What they miss entirely is the deeper cost underneath all of that. Every abandoned plan becomes a small piece of evidence in a case you are slowly building against yourself. One dead plan means very little on its own, but enough evidence, collected across enough years, and you start to believe the verdict that case is building toward, that you are simply not someone who follows through, that plans are things other people manage to keep and you are not. And once you believe that verdict, something quietly changes in how you approach everything afterward. You stop attempting the big things altogether, not because you ran out of ambition, but because you ran out of trust in your own follow-through. That is the real price of a dead plan, not the missed month. The slow erosion of your belief that change is even possible for you, which then becomes the ceiling on every future attempt you make. So let's take that apart properly, piece by piece, starting with the single most common design flaw of all. You built the plan for a person who does not actually live your life. The version of you who wrote the plan was probably rested, freshly inspired, sitting somewhere quiet with a coffee, picturing a future where everything goes right. But the version of you who actually has to carry the plan out shows up tired, distracted, juggling a day that did not go the way you had hoped it would. Those are, in a very practical sense, two different people occupying the same body at different hours of the week. The planner imagines waking at 5 every morning without fail, training daily without exception, cutting out everything enjoyable in one clean sweep, working 3 extra hours every single night after a full day of other responsibilities. On the day you wrote all of that down, it felt not just doable but almost easy, because you were designing the entire thing from your peak, your best mood, your clearest head, your most motivated hour. Nobody actually lives on the peak. Most days are lived somewhere in the ordinary middle, and when the ordinary, tired version of you eventually meets a plan that was only ever built for your best day, it looks at that plan, senses immediately that it is unreachable from where you're standing, and simply does nothing. That first quiet nothing is the crack that everything else eventually falls through. So the real test to apply to any plan before you commit yourself to it is not, can I do this when I feel inspired? It is, can I still do this on a rough, ordinary Tuesday 3 weeks from now, tired, behind on sleep, in a slightly bad mood, with nothing going particularly well that day? If the honest answer to that question is no, the plan is not ready yet, no matter how good it feels on paper today. Shrink it down until the answer becomes yes, because a plan that is sized correctly for your worst realistic day is a plan that can actually survive one when it inevitably arrives. And a bad day always shows up, almost without exception, somewhere inside the first 2 weeks, right around the point where the initial enthusiasm naturally starts to wear thin. The second flaw sits right next to the first one. and it is trying to change far too much all at the same time. Plans rarely fail because the individual changes chosen were wrong. They fail because 5 separate changes get bolted together and demanded of you starting on the exact same Monday morning. A new eating pattern, a new workout routine, a new sleep schedule, a new morning ritual, new rules around spending, all beginning at once, all announced to yourself with the same burst of enthusiasm. It feels ambitious in the moment. It genuinely feels like real transformation is finally underway, and it tends to collapse faster than any single change would have on its own, precisely because every new behavior costs real, conscious effort while it is still unfamiliar and has not yet become automatic. You have to actively remind yourself, actively push yourself every single time you do it. That conscious effort draws from one shared, limited internal reserve, not from 5 separate ones. Split 5 ways across 5 new habits at once. That reserve empties out fast, usually somewhere inside the first 2 weeks, and when it empties, all 5 habits tend to collapse together rather than one at a time. You do not lose 4 of them and quietly keep the 5th. You lose the whole set in roughly the same window, because they were all quietly pulling from the same drained account the entire time. The fix here is not more grit or more determination. It is sequencing. Choose the single most important change out of everything you're tempted to do at once, and build only that one until it runs without requiring a fight from you, which can genuinely take several weeks, sometimes a couple of months, longer than most people are patient enough to allow. Only once that first change has become close to automatic do you add the next one on top of it. This approach looks slow from the outside. It can even feel a little unambitious in the moment, compared to the excitement of overhauling everything at once. But someone who upgrades one thing every few months and actually keeps each one ends the year having made 4 or 5 permanent changes to how they live. Someone who tries to overhaul 5 things every single January usually has none of them left by the time February arrives. Slow and permanent consistently and reliably outperforms fast and temporary. The third flaw is quietly running your entire plan on motivation instead of on structure. Motivation is a genuinely real feeling, but it behaves far more like weather than like climate. Strong and abundant on day 1, noticeably weaker by roughly day 14, and that predictable fading is not some personal failing unique to you. That is simply what emotions do by nature. They rise sharply, and then they recede, every time, for everyone. If your plan only functions on the days you happen to feel like doing it, you have quietly tied the entire structure to something that is guaranteed to fade on a fairly predictable schedule. And when that motivation does fade, as it always eventually does, most people interpret the moment completely wrong. They conclude they have simply lost their motivation, and they treat that loss as solid proof that the plan itself is over, rather than recognizing it as the entirely normal, entirely predictable moment that every single plan eventually runs into. The plans that actually last are not run by people who somehow manage to stay motivated the whole way through. Nobody manages that, not once, not ever, no matter how disciplined they might appear from the outside. The plans that last are run by people who built something that simply does not require the feeling to be present at all. A fixed time of day, a fixed physical place, a fixed trigger that sets the action in motion automatically, in more or less the same way that brushing your teeth does not require a fresh wave of inspiration each morning. You do not pause to ask yourself whether you are in the mood for it. You simply do the thing, because that is what happens at that particular hour, in that particular spot, every single time, mood or no mood. Build the plan around structure rather than feeling, and the day the initial excitement disappears, which it will, reliably, usually somewhere inside the first 2 weeks, the plan keeps running regardless, because it was never actually depending on that feeling to begin with. The fourth flaw is the one that quietly wrecks more plans than almost anything else on this list, and it is not the slip itself that causes the damage. It is the story you immediately tell yourself about what that slip means. Everyone slips at some point. You will miss a day, skip a session, break the pattern once, somewhere inside that first month. And this is simply what happens whenever a human being attempts to change something about how they live. The slip on its own is not the failure. The interpretation you privately attach to that slip, in the minutes right after it happens, is where the real failure quietly begins. Most people miss a single day and immediately, almost automatically, conclude that they have already blown the whole thing, that the streak is broken, that this single missed day is proof they were never really capable of doing this in the first place. And once that particular story takes hold in your mind, one missed day very quickly turns into a missed week, which then turns into a fully abandoned plan, not because the original missed day genuinely mattered on its own, but because the story you attached to it did all of the actual damage afterward. Let me walk you through someone who ran into exactly this pattern over and over for years. She had tried to build a simple walking habit more times than she could accurately count, and every single attempt followed an almost identical shape. She would start strong, walk consistently for a week or two, feel genuinely proud of the progress, and then one day something would interrupt it. She would get busy or tired, or simply would not go that particular day. And the moment she missed that one single day, the entire habit would come apart within roughly a week, every single time, without exception. Eventually, after enough repeated cycles, she noticed that the actual pattern was never really in the walking itself. She had already proven, many times over, that she was physically capable of doing it consistently for stretches. The real pattern lived entirely in what one missed day meant to her afterward. So she made exactly one small rule for herself and changed nothing else about the plan. Never miss twice in a row. Missing once was fully allowed. That's simply what happens when you're human, and life gets in the way occasionally. But missing twice in a row was not permitted under any circumstance, and she quietly refused to let it happen. If yesterday had been skipped for whatever reason, today became completely non-negotiable. No exceptions offered to herself. That single rule changed everything about how the plan actually functioned. A missed day no longer triggered the old story of total failure and permanent proof that she couldn't do this. It simply triggered the rule instead, which pointed her straight back toward the next opportunity rather than away from the whole plan. A year later, she was still walking regularly, several times a week, without much internal struggle left in it. She had missed plenty of individual days across that full year, entirely normal ones scattered throughout. But she had never once let it become 2 missed days in a row. The habit that used to reliably die in tidy 2-week bursts finally held for a full year, not because she suddenly discovered a reservoir of discipline she didn't have before, but because she removed the one story that used to let a single ordinary slip take the entire plan down with it. The fifth flaw concerns who you actually tell about your plan, and just as importantly, how you tell them. Most people fall into one of two extremes here. They either keep the entire plan completely private, or they announce it loudly to everyone they know all at once. And both versions, when handled carelessly, quietly work against the plan's chances of surviving. Keep it fully secret, and there is nobody watching to notice if you quietly let it go somewhere along the way. A plan that no one else is aware of is remarkably easy to abandon, without ever having to formally admit to yourself, let alone anyone else, that it happened. On the other hand, announce it loudly and broadly to everyone around you. And something different but equally damaging tends to happen instead. You receive an immediate wave of approval and encouragement just for having said the words out loud, well before you've actually done a single day of the real work involved. That early, unearned taste of the reward can quietly drain away the drive you would otherwise need to go out and actually earn it properly. There is a third option most people never seriously consider, and it happens to be the one that actually works reliably in practice. Tell a small number of people, not everyone, and not no one, who will genuinely check in with you rather than simply nodding along politely and moving on with their day. And tell them the specific, concrete commitment involved, rather than the sweeping, dramatic vision behind it. Not "I'm completely changing my life this year," which buys you cheap applause and essentially nothing else of real value. Instead, something much closer to, I'm doing this exact, specific thing at this exact, specific time each day, and I genuinely want you to ask me directly on Friday whether I actually did it. That is not an announcement chasing approval. That is accountability with real teeth behind it, and it makes quietly abandoning the plan meaningfully harder than it would be if absolutely no one else were paying any attention at all. The sixth flaw is building a plan that leaves absolutely no room in it for an ordinary, imperfect life to actually happen around it. Most plans are quietly designed around a version of the coming month where nothing at all goes wrong. Full, uninterrupted energy every day, a perfectly clear and predictable schedule, zero unexpected surprises anywhere along the way. And then the actual month arrives the way it always eventually does. Someone close to you gets sick, work suddenly becomes genuinely chaotic for a stretch, something entirely unplanned consumes exactly the hours and the energy you had quietly been counting on for your plan. None of that is bad luck striking you specifically. That is simply what a normal, real month tends to contain for almost everyone, and a plan that was only ever built for the ideal week snaps almost immediately the moment an ordinary, imperfect week shows up in its place instead, because the plan left itself absolutely no room to bend without breaking outright. The plans that consistently survive are built from the start with two separate settings available to them. A full version reserved for the good days, and a small, almost embarrassingly minimal version kept in reserve specifically for the hard ones. 5 minutes instead of a full hour, one short paragraph instead of an entire writing session, a token, symbolic amount instead of the complete intended commitment. The real point of that minimum version is not the output it produces on any given day, because on its own, that output is genuinely small and not particularly meaningful. The real point is that it directly prevents the actual enemy of any developing habit, which is not really a hard day at all. It is the zero, the day you do absolutely nothing whatsoever, the day the entire chain breaks cleanly and completely. Decide on exactly what that minimum version looks like well in advance, before you actually need it on some difficult future day, and the worst days you encounter, stop having the power to end the whole plan outright. And the seventh flaw, the final one worth understanding clearly, is measuring entirely the wrong thing during those critical first 30 days. Almost no plan produces genuinely visible results that early on. The required effort begins immediately from day one, but the actual payoff from that effort almost always shows up considerably later, sometimes much later than feels fair or reasonable, and that uncomfortable gap between effort and visible result is exactly where the majority of plans quietly die. You put in real honest effort for 2 or 3 consecutive weeks, and the scale has not meaningfully moved. The account balance looks essentially the same as it did before. Nothing visibly different has happened yet that you can point to, and the part of you that is quietly looking for some tangible return on all that invested effort naturally starts asking what the actual point of continuing even is. Left completely unanswered, that reasonable-sounding question is usually what ends the plan for good. The fix here is to stop measuring the invisible, not yet existing result and start measuring the visible action you actually took instead. Did you show up today and do the thing? Yes or no? That simple question is the only real evidence genuinely available to you in that first month, precisely because the eventual outcome has not had nearly enough time yet to exist in any measurable form. Mark the specific days you followed through completely. Let plain consistency itself count as the actual win while you patiently wait for the deeper results to eventually catch up and become visible. Because those results, whenever they do finally arrive, are really nothing more than consistency that has simply had enough accumulated time to compound properly. So here is the complete picture, put back together as one coherent whole. Build the plan around your average, tired day, not your best and most inspired one. If you genuinely cannot picture yourself doing it on a rough, ordinary Tuesday, it is still too large in its current form. Change only one thing at a time, and allow it to become close to fully automatic before you add the next change on top of it. Because your personal capacity to force new behavior into existence is shared and genuinely limited, not unlimited the way it can feel on day one. Anchor the plan to a fixed time, a fixed place, and a fixed trigger instead of relying on a feeling, because the feeling is reliably scheduled to fade while the structure itself is not. Decide clearly in advance that missing once is simply human and entirely expected, while missing twice in a row is the one single thing you refuse to allow yourself, so that any individual slip can never again drag the entire plan down along with it. Choose a small number of genuine witnesses. Tell them the specific commitment rather than the sweeping vision, and let them actually ask you directly. Build a minimum version of the plan now, well before some inevitable hard day forces your hand later on, so that the worst days shrink down to something small instead of collapsing all the way to zero. And track carefully whether you actually showed up, rather than whether the result has appeared yet, because in that critical first month, showing up honestly is the only real evidence you have available to you. None of the plans that quietly died somewhere in your past died because there was something fundamentally wrong with you as a person. They died because of a small handful of genuinely fixable design choices, sized incorrectly for the wrong version of you, overloaded with far too many simultaneous changes at once, entirely dependent on a feeling that was never realistically going to last, left completely undefended against the very first ordinary slip, told to the wrong audience or to no one at all, built with absolutely no give left in it for a normal imperfect month, and judged unfairly by a result that simply had not had enough time yet to show up. Fix each of those one at a time in whatever plan you choose to build next, and that plan stops needing a version of willpower you were genuinely never going to have sitting in reserve anyway. It starts running instead on careful design, and design, unlike character, is something you are fully capable of examining, rebuilding, and improving, starting right now with the very next plan you sit down and actually write out.